250 million years ago, long before the first dinosaur ever took a breath, something else ruled the Earth. Picture this: a creature more massive than a grizzly bear, with jaws powerful enough to crush bone, teeth designed for killing, and a body built for dominance. This was no reptile as we understand them today. This was something far more terrifying. For over a century, paleontologists dismissed these ancient beasts as sluggish, cold-blooded primitives, evolutionary dead ends that simply held the planet until the real rulers arrived. But the truth is far stranger. Recent discoveries have shattered everything we thought we knew about the world before dinosaurs. These apex predators weren't just surviving. They were thriving in ways that challenge our fundamental understanding of evolution itself. The fossils tell a story of creatures so advanced, so perfectly adapted, that they dominated their world with an efficiency that would make modern predators envious. And here's what makes this discovery truly mind. Bending these animals possessed features we thought were exclusive to mammals and dinosaurs. Features that shouldn't exist in creatures from this era. Scientists are now asking a disturbing question. What if the evolutionary timeline we've been teaching for generations is completely wrong? To understand how we got here, we must go back to a time when the Earth itself was almost unrecognizable, to an age of monsters that history nearly forgot. The story begins in the Karoo Basin of South Africa, a vast, dusty landscape that holds one of the most complete fossil records on the planet. In the late 1800s, paleontologists began unearthing strange skulls from the red sandstone, massive, thick-boned structures with enormous canine teeth. They called these creatures mammal-like reptiles, a name that reveals just how confused early scientists were by what they'd found. These animals belonged to a group called synapsids, and they dominated the Permian period, the geological age that came before the dinosaurs. The Permian was a world of extremes. Imagine a supercontinent called Pangaea, where all of Earth's landmasses were fused into one gigantic expanse. The interior was a scorching desert, but along the coasts and in the south, forests of primitive conifers and seed ferns created ecosystems teeming with life. And at the top of the food chain stood the Gorgonopsians. The name comes from the Gorgons of Greek mythology, those snake-haired monsters whose gaze could turn you to stone. It's a fitting name. Gorgonopsians were the apex predators of their time, and some species grew to lengths of over 10 feet. The largest known species, Inostrancevia alexandri, weighed as much as 300 pounds of pure muscle and fury. But it wasn't just their size that made them formidable. Look at their skulls, and you see something unprecedented in the reptilian world: differentiated teeth. Unlike modern reptiles with their uniform rows of teeth, Gorgonopsians had incisors for gripping, massive canines for killing, and molars for processing flesh. Sound familiar? That's because this is a mammalian trait. These creatures had independently evolved a feeding strategy we associate with lions and wolves, but they did it millions of years before mammals even existed. Meanwhile, across the ancient world, other synapsid predators were carving out their own niches. The Dinocephalians, terrible heads, were earlier predators with thick skulls they may have used in combat, like modern bighorn sheep. The Therocephalians were smaller, more agile hunters, some with possible venom glands. But the Gorgonopsians stood apart. They were the culmination of millions of years of predatory evolution. By the late Permian, around 260 million years ago, they had spread across the southern portions of Pangaea, from what is now South Africa to Russia. Fossil evidence shows they hunted the dominant herbivores of their time: massive, barrel-bodied creatures called parasaurs, and the Dicynodonts, strange tusked animals that would later become some of the only survivors of the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history. The fossil record from this period is staggering. In some bone beds, Gorgonopsian remains are found alongside their prey, teeth marks visible on herbivore bones. Evidence of violence frozen in stone for 250 million years. But here's where the story takes a turn that has revolutionized our understanding of ancient life. For decades, paleontologists assumed these creatures were ectothermic, cold-blooded, sluggish, dependent on the sun to warm their bodies before they could hunt. This assumption shaped every reconstruction, every museum display, every textbook illustration. Gorgonopsians were portrayed as slow, sprawling beasts that spent their mornings basking on rocks. Then came the bone histology studies. In the early 2000s, scientists began slicing thin sections of fossilized Gorgonopsian bones and examining them under microscopes. What they found was shocking fibrolamellar bone, a type of fast, growing bone tissue that requires a high metabolic rate to produce. This is the same tissue found in modern mammals and birds. You don't develop fibrolamellar bone if you're cold-blooded and sluggish. You develop it if you're warm-blooded and active. The implications hit the paleontological community like a freight train. These weren't primitive reptiles at all. Gorgonopsians were likely endothermic, or at least mesothermic, maintaining elevated body temperatures through internal heat production. A 2018 study published in the journal Scientific Reports analyzed multiple Gorgonopsian specimens and concluded that these animals grew rapidly, reached maturity quickly, and maintained growth rates comparable to modern carnivorous mammals. But it gets even more remarkable. In 2021, researchers examining Gorgonopsian fossils from Russia noticed something unprecedented: evidence of possible whisker pits on the snout. Modern mammals use whiskers as sensory organs, detecting vibrations and navigating in low light. If Gorgonopsians had whiskers, it suggests not just advanced sensory capabilities, but also the presence of hair or hair-like structures. This was explosive. Hair is a defining characteristic of mammals, and here it was, potentially present in creatures that lived 50 million years before the first true mammals evolved. The anatomical revelations continued. Detailed studies of Gorgonopsian limb bones revealed something else unexpected. Their legs were positioned more directly beneath their bodies than previously thought. Early reconstructions showed them with a sprawling, lizard-like stance. But biomechanical analysis indicated they held their limbs in a semi-erect or even fully erect posture, similar to mammals. This meant they could move efficiently and chase down prey and sustain activity levels impossible for cold-blooded reptiles. A 2022 study using computer modeling to analyze Gorgonopsian locomotion concluded these predators could likely run at speeds of 20 to 25 miles per hour, fast enough to catch any herbivore in their ecosystem. Suddenly, we're looking at an entirely different animal, a warm-blooded, possibly fur-covered, fast-running predator with mammal-like hunting strategies. Why does this matter? Because it fundamentally challenges the narrative of evolution we've constructed. The traditional story goes like this. Reptiles dominated the Permian and Triassic periods. Then dinosaurs took over, and finally mammals emerged after the dinosaurs' extinction. Mammals were supposed to be the newcomers, the innovators, the ones who brought warm-bloodedness and intelligence to the animal kingdom. But Gorgonopsians tell us a different story. They tell us that the defining features of mammals, endothermy, differentiated teeth, advanced sensory systems, efficient locomotion, were already present in the Permian long before dinosaurs or mammals. These features weren't mammalian innovations. They were ancient survival strategies that worked so well they were reinvented by multiple lineages across deep time. Consider the ecological consequences. A warm-blooded predator requires significantly more food than a cold-blooded one. A Gorgonopsian would have needed to kill regularly to maintain its metabolism, creating intense predation pressure on herbivore populations. This would have shaped entire ecosystems, driving the evolution of defensive adaptations in prey species: larger body sizes, thicker armor, herding behavior. The fossil record supports this. Late Permian herbivores show increasing size and defensive features, a clear arms race between predator and prey. And at the center of it all was the Gorgonopsian, the driving force of ecological change. But then everything ended. At the boundary between the Permian and Triassic periods, 252 million years ago, the Earth experienced the most catastrophic mass extinction event in its history. The Permian-Triassic extinction, often called the Great Dying, wiped out approximately 90% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species. Massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere. Global temperatures soared. Oceans became acidic and oxygen depleted, and the Gorgonopsians, despite their dominance, despite their adaptations, went extinct. Not a single species survived. The aftermath was a world of ghosts. For millions of years, the early Triassic was a recovery period where life struggled to rebuild. The synapsids that did survive, small, burrowing dicynodonts and a few other herbivores, limped into this new world. And in the ecological vacuum left by the Gorgonopsians, a new group of predators began to rise: the archosaurs, the lineage that would eventually give rise to dinosaurs and crocodiles. By the Middle Triassic, dinosaurs were emerging, and by the Late Triassic, they had become the dominant terrestrial predators. The age of the Gorgonopsians was over, remembered only in fossil-rich stone. But here's the grand reveal that changes everything: the Gorgonopsians weren't evolutionary failures. They were evolutionary pioneers. Every adaptation we celebrate in mammals, warm-bloodedness, specialized teeth, advanced sensory systems, was field-tested by these ancient predators for millions of years. When mammals finally did emerge in the Triassic, they were essentially re-evolving strategies that had already proven successful. The Gorgonopsians showed that these traits worked, that they provided survival advantages, that they were worth the metabolic cost. In a very real sense, mammals owe their existence to the evolutionary experiments of creatures that died out 250 million years ago. This changes everything we thought we understood about the march of evolution. It's not a straight line from primitive to advanced. It's a web of experimentation, with different lineages discovering similar solutions to the same problems. The Gorgonopsians reached heights of predatory sophistication that wouldn't be seen again until the age of dinosaurs. And in some ways, they were more advanced than any reptile alive today. Recent research has taken this even further. In 2023, a groundbreaking study published in Nature examined the brain cases of several Gorgonopsian specimens using CT scanning technology. The results revealed enlarged olfactory bulbs and complex inner ear structures, suggesting these animals had keen senses of smell and excellent balance, traits essential for active hunting. The study's lead author noted that the neurological complexity of Gorgonopsians rivals that of many modern carnivorous mammals. Think about what that means. These creatures weren't just physically advanced, they were cognitively sophisticated. They likely used strategy, patience, and sensory acuity to hunt. They may have been capable of complex behaviors we typically associate with much more recent predators. And then came a discovery that sent shockwaves through the paleontological community. In early 2024, researchers in the Karoo Basin uncovered a nearly complete Gorgonopsian skeleton surrounded by the remains of at least 4 juveniles. The bones showed signs of prolonged association, suggesting these weren't just random individuals who died together. They were a family group. The implications are staggering. Parental care is a trait we associate with mammals and birds, not with Permian predators. But here was evidence that Gorgonopsians may have raised their young, protected them, perhaps even taught them to hunt. If confirmed, this would represent the earliest evidence of parental care in a terrestrial predator, pushing back the origins of this behavior by tens of millions of years. The deeper researchers look, the stranger it becomes. Every new fossil, every new analysis, reveals another layer of complexity. In 2025, a team analyzing fossilized Gorgonopsian skin impressions reported the presence of structures that could be interpreted as primitive hair follicles or scale fiber hybrids. If accurate, this suggests that the transition from scales to fur happened not once, but potentially multiple times in different lineages. The boundary between reptile and mammal is far blurrier than we ever imagined. These discoveries force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The categories we use to classify ancient life, reptile, mammal, dinosaur, are human constructs imposed on a continuum of gradual evolutionary change. Gorgonopsians don't fit neatly into any box. They're neither reptile nor mammal. They're something in between, something that defies our need for clean labels. So where does this leave us? What does it mean that the apex predators of the Permian were more advanced than we ever suspected? For one, it means we need to completely reconsider the prehistory of complex life on Earth. The evolutionary innovations we thought were unique to mammals or dinosaurs were actually much older, tested and refined by creatures like the Gorgonopsians. These animals weren't placeholders in the evolutionary story, they were trailblazers. Second, It highlights the fragility of dominance. The Gorgonopsians ruled their world for millions of years, perfectly adapted, highly successful. And yet, when catastrophe struck, they vanished. No amount of evolutionary sophistication could save them from the Permian, Triassic extinction. It's a sobering reminder that even the most powerful creatures are vulnerable to planetary, scale disasters. But perhaps most importantly, the story of the Gorgonopsians tells us that evolution is far more creative and unpredictable than we give it credit for. Life doesn't follow a script. It experiments, adapts, and sometimes arrives at similar solutions through completely different paths. The warm-blooded, active predators we see today, lions, wolves, tigers, are echoes of creatures that lived in a world so ancient it predates even the concept of a dinosaur. And in some ways, those ancient predators were just as remarkable, just as finely tuned, just as dominant as anything that came after. The future of Gorgonopsian research is incredibly exciting. Paleontologists are now applying cutting-edge technology to fossils that have been sitting in museums for over a century. High-resolution CT scans are revealing internal bone structures. Chemical analysis is uncovering metabolic signatures. Computer modeling is reconstructing how these animals moved, hunted, and lived. With every passing year, we get closer to understanding what these creatures truly were. There are still mysteries to solve. Did they have social structures beyond simple family groups? How varied were their hunting strategies? What colors were they? Did they vocalize? Did different species coexist, or did they compete for territory? The fossil record holds clues, but many questions remain tantalizingly out of reach. And here's the thing that keeps scientists up at night. If Gorgonopsians were this advanced, what else are we missing? How many other prehistoric creatures have we misunderstood, categorized incorrectly, or underestimated? The history of life on Earth is written in stone, but we're still learning how to read it. Every fossil is a fragment of a story, and sometimes, when we finally piece those fragments together, the story is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. The Gorgonopsians are proof of that. They're proof that the world before dinosaurs wasn't a primitive prelude to real prehistory. It was a fully realized, complex, dynamic world filled with creatures every bit as remarkable as the ones that came after. As we stand in museum halls, looking at the reconstructed skull of an Innostrancevia, jaw agape with those massive canine teeth gleaming, we're not just looking at a fossil. We're looking at a revolution in our understanding of life's history. We're looking at an animal that challenges everything we thought we knew about evolution, adaptation, and dominance. We're looking at the Apex Predator before dinosaurs, and it changes everything. Because in the end, the Earth has hosted countless rulers, countless apex predators, countless evolutionary experiments. The Gorgonopsians had their reign, and then they were gone. Their legacy buried in stone and nearly forgotten. But now, we're finally giving them the recognition they deserve. We're finally seeing them not as primitive failures, but as sophisticated predators that paved the way for everything that came after. And the greatest mystery still remains: what other secrets are waiting beneath the surface, in stone not yet split, in fossils not yet found? The story of life is far from complete. The Gorgonopsians taught us that. And somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the world, another discovery is waiting, one that will once again rewrite the history of life on Earth. Because the deeper we dig, the more we realize we've only just begun to understand the true story of our planet's past.